Welcome everybody to our Friday community gathering, November 24, and um, we already had a catch up with the community, and now we're passing through our guest stage, and our first guest of today is Albert Anis from ValleyDAO. So I'm looking forward to know more. ValleyDAO is a global community helping research and maximize impact by making the ideas of the community come alive. Definitely looking forward to know more. Welcome, Albert.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you see my screen? Let's try
Um,
to
Let
do a
me look
screen
at it.
share. Do you see a slide presentation here?
Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Thank you for reaching out on Twitter and inviting me. Always happy to talk about what we do and also learn a little bit about what other projects out there are doing. Um, We're called ValleyDAO, and we go by the subheading, the Decentralized Synthetic Biology Innovation Ecosystem. Um, that's a lot of words. Some of you might not have heard about synthetic biology in the past. I will go over all of this in detail, and hopefully you'll get an understanding of the technology and its potential to solve various climate challenges. Before I go into it, just briefly about myself. So I'm originally from Sweden. Grew up there, studied biotechnology at a university. I graduated, and I've spent most of my post-graduation career working directly with researchers in synthetic biology and helping them essentially bring their research and their technologies outside of the lab where they can have a real world impact. Um, I've been dabbling in crypto since like 2016. And then in 2018 and 19, I started getting more interested in the decentralization aspects, particularly DAOs, and how they can be leveraged to create impact on a more global scale to get more people involved into a certain mission. And that mission for us is how can we bring more synthetic biology technologies outside of the lab into the real world? So it's a decentralized platform that allows essentially anyone in the world to fund, govern, and co-develop technologies that uses biology to solve climate challenges. We operate, very similar to a DAO. It's funded by community members and different strategic partners. The community members are involved in going to various universities all over the world, building relationships with researchers, and then develop research proposals with those researchers that then the community votes on, which research project ultimately gets funded. And then the community that consists of researchers, entrepreneurs, investors, and other distinct professionals all work together to co-develop this funded technology together with the funded researcher. So Earth is one giant biological system. What I mean by that is that it's in a way a perfect system in a sense that it is self-contained and it produces all of the inputs that it needs all by itself. And ultimately, this is all done through biology. We have trees that take up carbon dioxide, converts that into oxygen and food. We have bacteria. We have various animals that eats up waste, degrades it, and replenishes back into the soil, and the cycle repeats. And there is a lot that we can we've learned to tap into biology and derive solutions that can benefit our society. In the last 40 to 50 years, we've learned to study biology at its most intimate level, which is the genetic level. And this is where biological technologies come into play. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of synthetic biology. So as I mentioned before, biology can teach us many things. One example is spiders. They produce this very rigid and flexible silk. And we've managed to, not us, but like the synthetic biology industry has managed to extract the genes responsible for the production of this silk and introduce them into brewer's yeast, and then grown the brewer's yeast in a similar way that you brew beer in a steel container using only sugar, water, electricity to develop a new material that can be spun together into any garment of your choice. We've managed to generate lab-grown meats. So instead of slaughtering animals, we can isolate a couple of cells from the animal, and we can create basically give nutrients to those cells, and then they will start replicating and essentially put together this slurry of protein that we can then put together into lab-grown meats. And there are companies out there today who've managed to really crack this, and it's very difficult to distinguish like their lab-grown meats from actual real meat. So this is quite interesting. We can even make cement without pushing out a bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So there are bacteria in nature that have this natural ability to precipitate calcium carbonate, and when they do that, they start building, they start aggregating a bunch of inorganic material that essentially replicates the features of cement. And same thing there. We can take these organisms, we can grow them into a bioreactor, and then we can shape them into the actual thing. All in a much more sustainable way, using less water. They can be locally produced, meaning that this steel container that you have in the middle here, this can be set up anywhere in the world. And given that it runs on things like sugar, water, electricity, which more or less every country has, we can grow these things locally and rely less on shipping around commodities all over the world. And of course, we can use carbon dioxide to grow these organisms. And carbon dioxide is highly abundant, so being able to generate a bunch of really valuable commodities without putting a bunch of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is a great accomplishment. Now, this category of science is called synthetic biology, and some people like to compare it as programming, similar to computer programming, but you're actually programming on the genetic level. So you're programming the A, C, T, and G's of the biological code. And the image that you have here to the left is basically kind of like the principles that a lot of synthetic biologists go by. So it's about looking, and getting inspiration from nature, find organisms with interesting features, program those organisms by changing the genetic code, using computational methods to find new genetic sequences that can be introduced. And then you grow these into so-called bioreactors to produce various foods, fuels, medicine, etc. And these are all of the companies, or some of the companies, who are targeting and depolluting various industries, everything from fuels to animal agriculture to chemicals, clothes, agriculture, and so on. But the big question here is like, why aren't all of these technologies here yet? Why are we still having huge climate problems and so on? And the thing is, they're very difficult to develop, and they're not only very difficult to develop, but there is also a huge funding bottleneck. All of these technologies, they're developed at academic institutions. And the way to receive funding as an academic is through either the government or some other philanthropic type of funding. And these funding sources are extremely slow, and academics have to spend almost 50% of their time raising from slow, usually biased as well, organizations that favor, a certain set of researcher that gets the same grants year over year. So we believe funding should be faster, objective, and prioritize research that actually has an impact rather than, generating publications. The second thing is that scientists are not trained to commercialize their work. They're trained on a technical level to develop the technology, but not necessarily, understanding what it takes to actually bring it to the market, to understand the techno-economics and the business development, all of that. So this leads to a so-called a valley of death, where you have a bunch of technologies at universities who are essentially sitting there gathering dust, and there's not that much happening with them. And finally, it's a very competitive industry currently, and there's no real platform where people can co-develop technologies. So I'm going to go into how we are solving all of these three issues. So how are we solving funding? So first of all, you should know that funding availability is a function of how mature a technology is. So technology maturity is like on the furthest right, you have a technology that is like ready to hit the market essentially, whereas on the furthest left, you have technology that is still in academia. And usually on each side of the spectrum here, there is a lot of available funding. But actually in the middle, there isn't that much funding, and that's called the translational gap. Governments don't want to fund this because to them, they consider that as like, okay, it's already been developed by an academic and there's a publication for it, so there's really no need for us to throw more money at it. Whereas venture capital thinks it's too early to go in. So you have kind of like a huge sink of technologies that are not coming out. So what we're doing is we're building a community of highly incentivized individuals that can both co-fund and co-govern research at this translational gap to essentially bridge technologies out from universities into the real world. How are we solving the translational gap? So how are we solving the commercialization of these technologies? So once again, we leverage our community that consists of various professionals. So these are researchers, entrepreneurs, investors who've commercialized research in the past. We match them up with the academics that we fund, and in return for contributing their skill sets, their network, they receive our governance token, which is Grow, but also fractions in the resulting intellectual property, which in a way gives them exposure to if this particular technology becomes successful, they also receive some of that upside. I'm going to go into also later how this works. So but what you essentially have is a faster commercialization process, and also incentive alignment, thanks to the governance token. And finally, how are we increasing collaboration and co-development of funded research, right? One of the ways that we're doing that is that whenever we fund a project, ValleyDAO receives a stake in the resulting intellectual property. We leverage something called IP NFTs, which enables us to put IP assets. An IP asset can be data from the funded research. It can be a patent. It can be essentially a blueprint for how to do something to solve a problem, right? We use IP NFTs to bridge these assets on chain, which makes sense because they're essentially funded research by a DAO. And by having the asset on chain, it enables the DAO in a permissionless manner to govern its own IP asset, which it funded, right? And this makes sense because you want, in a way, to give people some sort of receipt on their funding that they will actually get something in return. And in our case, it's the governance right of the generated IP. But given that it's an on-chain asset, what you can do now is that you can fractionalize this asset into IP fractions, and you can distribute these fractions to funders of a research project. You can distribute them to the researcher, right? Because they the funders put in money, the researchers put in intellectual capital and experimental time, so they receive some of the fractions. But also then you have the community contributors and developers who can also receive these fractions by, for example, analyzing experimental data, connecting the researcher with a for example a collaborative partner, or doing some other thing that is like really valuable for the research project. They can receive parts of the intellectual property. So you can imagine what this does on a collaboration level. People are, essentially co-governing a portfolio of intellectual property, and they have a direct incentive to actually bring these technology to the market because they're also in a way co-owners of the intellectual property. And let me go over the first funded project. We through the community we funded this project of around $250,000. It's a project with Imperial College London that aims to use a certain type of yeast that can produce fats and lipids in really high amounts. And these fats and lipids can be applied in everything from fuels to foods to industry. And what you see here on the image to the right is a orangutan working together with a human being to produce these oils. Because this comes from like the palm oil industry, taking the habitation of orangutans, and we thought it would be in a way symbolic to show man and ape finally collaborating to solve this big problem. So this is the first funded project, as I mentioned, and the community has a direct stake in this intellectual property. So once the research starts in the lab, and once it starts, generating viable data that this thing is going to work, and we can actually bring it to industry, then the community will start gaining a much bigger role in actually bringing it to industry, and so on. The second project that we worked on is actually we actually did not fund this project, but rather we got in touch with the researcher Pablo Van Nickel at Denmark's Technical University, and they already had developed a patent and in this case they're making high performance biomaterials that can that are produced in a much more sustainable way, but that can still resist, very extreme conditions such as extreme weathers. They're like anti-fouling, anti-rust, and so on. So can be applied in a wide range of industries. But they had this technology, and they kind of like didn't know what to do with it. It was just kind of like sitting there. So when we connected with them, we were able to bring people in from the community to assess the technology and also assess its commercial opportunity and how it can be applied in industry. So what we did is we helped them put together a C team of a CEO, a CSO, and a COO. We helped them with developing a business plan, and then we essentially also finally helped them with also raising 500,000 euros. And now they're part of a really good incubator program. And it's super awesome because now that technology is not just sitting there, it's actually having a real world application, solving a real climate problem. So how do we sustain this activity, right? Like we can't just fund science purely philanthropically. We need some sort of way to recoup the costs so that we can continue growing the community, fund more research, and create more impact. So how it works is that whenever we fund a research project or provide commercial support to it, we get a little bit of the proceeds and the equity if there is a license of the IP to industry, or if there is a company that is created to ultimately continue this flywheel of funding research. So how do we leverage the token in this, right? I really see this as like the engine for driving all of this activity. Of course, we have like the traditional use cases, which is voting. So in this case, people vote and govern how an IP portfolio is used, like how it's commercialized, whom it's licensed, and under what conditions, and so on. And this makes the distribution of technologies much more democratic in a way, because more people are actually involved in having a say of how the technology goes into the real world. Um, People can stake into individual IP NFTs. So if there's a particular project that they really believe in that ValleyDAO has funded, they can convert their grow tokens into fractions of the IP NFT as a way to kind of like double down. So if there is a positive outcome from the IP NFT, they also get rewarded. Of course, there's incentives. So people who contribute with their time, their expertise, and their network receive the token. And then finally, we're developing something called a tech tree platform, which is essentially a collaboration platform where scientists, investors, industry can come and get match made with each other to essentially create new opportunities for them. We have more research projects coming up. So we have one project with NASA that looks into how can we use biology in space applications. So when astronauts actually go up there, they have very limited resources and very limited ways. Like they cannot bring that much up with them. Instead, it makes actually more sense to just produce what you actually need at that moment in time. And if you remember the previous slides that I showed you, where you have very like small microorganisms that can essentially be programmed to produce pharmaceuticals, foods, fuels, etc. When you're up in space, you can take one of these microorganisms, maybe one out of the 50 different microorganisms in your arsenal can produce a certain pharmaceutical that you need at that point in time. You start multiplying that, and then you have your pharmaceutical, so that you don't have to bring everything up with you to space. Second one is with Stanford University. This project looks at how we can engineer plants in a much faster way to make them produce more fruit, more nutritious foods, and resist, very extreme and dry conditions. And this is a problem that is becoming more and more relevant, given that temperature is increasing. Things are getting drier, soils are getting much more difficult to produce crops on, and hopefully this project can help. And then finally, we have a project with Harvard University, which is kind of like more of like on the futuristic side of things. So we're trying there to create an isolated ecosystem that runs that you can live in, that runs purely on electricity, and it recycles all of the atoms, so all of the oxygen that you breathe out, and reconverts that into food. And this can be used both on planet, but also on off planet and space travel scenarios. So these are some up and coming research projects. We've in many cases been kind of like taken the role of bridging the bio and the blockchain industry in a way. I think both of these industries, they kind of like don't know so much about each other, but there are so many ways that they can collaborate to create a much better future. So earlier this year, we hosted an event in Montenegro where we actually managed to get Vitalik Buterin to meet with Drew Endy, who's kind of like one of the founding figures in synthetic biology. And of course, we managed to get a bunch of other people there as well, many from the blockchain industry who've never heard about synthetic biology before. And yeah, potentially we could have created like this might have led into some sort of impact that we can't measure today. But I think we're going to start seeing some interesting innovations at the intersection of bio and blockchain. We've also been featured in various news articles, Forbes, Blockworks, Nature publications, and so on. And I think all of these are quite curious what's happening, because they hear like science and then they hear like crypto and blockchain. Like how the heck are you getting all of these two things together? And then when they actually see how everything works, they get more and more interested. So we've been talking with Nature publications since they made this article, and we're considering to do some collaborations in the future. we've grown quite. You can't see the numbers here. It's 8, 13, 22, and 35. So we've grown quite significantly since we started out. This is the number of active contributors that contributes at least 2 hours per week. So seems to be a working model here with the incentive system, but we can't really extrapolate how this is going to work out in the future. But so far, we're seeing a good growth, and we're able to see, kind of like community problem fit, if that makes sense. We've been community funded since, or community owned since day one. So there was no pre-sale or pre-allocation anyway. An initial set of tokens were auctioned out through a Gnosis auction, followed by partnering up with True Ventures, BioXYZ, Beaker DAO, ID Theory, which are all strategic partners that have allocated capital to the community treasury. Yeah, that's it, guys. I hope I did not go over time. But if you're interested in getting involved, learn more about synthetic biology, or just come and hang out in our Discord, you're more than welcome. So you can read more at ValleyDAO.bio/community. Yeah, no. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Albert. You actually had 3 minutes more if you want to share any last thoughts. I enjoyed today's space. Your information, the information you provided, it really interests me. I would like to have all the links you want to share. Feel free to post them on the town hall chat or in Metasquare. Any place you can be able to drop them, so we can share it with the community.
Yeah.
Please,
Yeah.
if you have anything written on the Tech Tree project, would love to read more about that.
Yes, of course. Peth, I'll let me connect you to. I'll pull something up. It's mainly the product team that has been working on it, and they're still in the process of like conducting stakeholder interviews and looking at some example use cases to demonstrate how the product can be used essentially. But actually, you should check out. So one thing that we're using is called where can I write? It's called I can't send messages in this channel. It's called coordination network. I'll write it in the MetaSquare coordination network. We're using that as a backend
here as well now.
Okay. Yeah, coordination network as a backend, because it allows you to essentially create how do you say, like, there's various types of diagrams that allows you to kind of like map out the technology space. And with coordination network, you can do that through a community. So yeah, highly recommend checking that one out, and happy to keep you updated about the tech trees as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, coordination network sounds super cool. They're built on ceramic, by the way, this Bulik. Joel told me about them about a month ago. Cool. Yeah, thank you again for coming on. This was great.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to take a question or two. I'm really keen to also get a feel for if you guys got a grasp of what synthetic biology is, what we're trying to do, and so on. I'm always happy to complement any thoughts, so on.